Okay, I wanted to show you my assembly table that doubles as a outfeed table, a side feed table, a router table, as well as a dust extraction area. So I can sand, I can route, I can do everything like that and have dust extraction. Now this guy here, this rigid vacuum has been in here for quite a while and it doesn't leave. Look at this thing. Okay, this is just, it's kind of funny actually. This is just like soot. And I guess this happens when you have motors going in cabinets like this for a while. But in any case, it is pretty crazy to think that this is in here, but it's in here and it never leaves. It does a great job. It does have a muffler on it, as well as a HEPA filter and a bag. But the biggest thing is that it's tool actuated. So when I start the tool, obviously it goes on, and that's accompanied with the IVAC switch. I didn't always have the IVAC switch. In fact, that's a recent upgrade, maybe within the last year and a half or so. I know I did a video on that. I'm super excited about that. The Oneida Dust Deputy, I mean, I can't speak highly enough about this. So this is a tremendous asset in my shop. So day in and day out, right? I'm sanding, I'm routing, I'm doing whatever I'm doing, and I'm collecting the dust. I'm really, I feel like it's really important to collect as much dust as possible. And this has been, you know, I love it. So you just have to every now and again go in here, switch it out, you know, dump it, and then, you know, make sure it's clean. Because if you don't do that and you forget, it's going to fill that up. So maintain that and make sure it's empty. You know, make sure it doesn't get too full. And then I've got all my sander. Now, these are my old sanders. So unfortunately, they don't quite work with the Festool sanders. In other words, the paper doesn't. So all that paper, it's all for the Porter Cable 5-inch sanders that I have, or the Bosch. I've got a Bosch 6-inch, and they're great sanders, but I don't use them anymore. I've got biscuit joiners in there and some other various tools, but basically that's my sanding area. And up until the time when I got all my Festool stuff, this has been, you know, my go-to, and it worked great. I needed a particular sanding grit. I could put it in there. The shelves are adjustable and everything works really well. Now, this itself is all one big cabinet. Now, in the middle of it is a router. So when I designed this cabinet, I designed it so that I could have a secondary router. So I keep another Milwaukee in there. And then that's a phenomenal spot, because every now and again, I need to do like big jobs where I'm, you know, flush trimming a big piece or something. And I need to basically freehand flush trim stuff and or, you know, work with the router in some fashion. So that's why I use this area as a router station. And then in the middle here, I've got the hose that literally goes through and it connects to my Dust Deputy. It works really well. So, I mean, this is an ideal setup because I'm using so much space. I like the idea that it's centered, because when it's centered, that means I've got full, you know, use of that area and full use of this area. And I'm not using the router fence. Most of the time, this is just freehand flush trimming, so I don't have to worry about a fence getting in the way. However, I do have my secondary fence right there that I can put on and use it as a normal routing station. And of course, I've got the slots here. Now, let me tell you something about these slots. I don't typically use these slots for miter gauges with the router stations, but they're a great spot to put pencils. And this is definitely a great spot, but it's also a good spot for hold downs. So although the miter slot's not so much used, the hold down slots are used if I need to, hold something down. Another thing that I did was I incorporated an additional strip back here. And what that's for is to connect my overhead dust hose holder. So basically I've got my hose comes up here and I can connect right to the, above the router bit as it spins. That's a really cool thing, really cool feature to have, the ability to do that. So if you look at the way this is built, I've got a few things happening. This particular cabinet is basically like 25 inches deep or something like that. And it's completely separate from this cabinet over here. So if you look, you notice there's a space in between. That's because they're two separate cabinets. Now, when I built this cabinet here, I had already had this cabinet. And the idea was that I would just have them separate. And I never really thought about having them be together. But when I did it this way, it made a lot of sense if you want something portable and this was on wheels and this was on wheels. And so I thought, you know what, it's great. I can move this stuff out of the way when I'm done. But as my career took off in woodworking, I decided forget about it. I'm just going to make this a permanent structure, no movement, although the wheels are still on everything. Well, actually, I took the wheels off here. The wheels are still on this part, but they're pretty much not even touching the floor anymore. So those are not being used because I had to raise everything up. And this is basically one big structure now. Now, of course, when you look at the main bones of this, you might recognize this as a work table, an assembly table that my favorite, woodworker of all time, Norm Abrams, he made one like this on the New Yankee Workshop. And I thought, you know what better table to make than the one he made? So I actually modified this table to suit my needs, but this is based on his overall design and it works really well. The only thing I didn't do was that lift up wheel design that he put on it. However, that would have been a good idea considering I don't use the wheels. Now, this has been basically deep storage for me. It's been really good. And what I did instead of putting a big piece of plywood is instead I put a door. Now the door was the perfect size to fit in there. I think I maybe had to trim it a little bit, but it basically was the exact size I needed. And it was a hollow core door and it was really strong. However, over the years, I think it's completely failed because I just realized a little while back that it's sagging. Now I looked at it and I'm like, wow, if you look, you can see everything's kind of sloped. Well, that's because this thing's failing. And the reason I have so much stuff under there is because it's holding it up. And so those sawhorses, they're literally there holding this up so it doesn't collapse more. Can you believe this? So after 20 years, this guy has finally failed. And I'm basically like, okay, I gotta do something new for this guy. So I am going to be redoing this whole thing. And I will be obviously putting it on my channel, trying to figure out what parts I want to rebuild because the structure is great. Well, I should say it's mostly great. I've made modifications to it and it's kind of hurt some of the stuff. I'll show you that in a second. But the bones are really good. So whether or not I want to change anything to incorporate another table saw, I'm not really sure, an additional table saw. So at this point, I'm going over my options because I just love everything about this whole thing. It's super good, but there may be some changes coming in the future only because I might incorporate another table saw. So with that in mind, I'm going to, show you some more. Now I've got my strip here, so you can see this is powered by the dust collector. So when I plug this tool in there, the vacuum turns on, so I can, obviously do all my sanding and whatever I do here. Now this also is an area where I have my hose for my compressor. I've got, this big 50-foot hose here, and it's actually connected to the ceiling of this cabinet, this outfeed table. So the top of it, it's bolted to, and this just spins freely. It's not touching the counter here at all. And this works really well because you know what? Those are always getting in the way, right? Hoses are always getting in the way. And so I didn't want something going overhead. I just felt like this was a perfect option for me. And I've got a 25-gallon compressor tucked away back there. So it really works really well for me. And of course I have another outlet, a surge protector there. These are just for plugging in various things. That will not control the vacuum. So those, sometimes you just want something and you're not going to turn the vacuum on. So that would be what I would use for that. And now you can see this whole area inside of here is, completely filled with stuff, but you can see the ribs at the top here are, obviously keeping this top nice and flat. And if you really look, you can see that 1/4-inch panel, that's actually the top to this actual outfeed table. So I took that 1/4-inch, that's the structure. And then, so this is a torsion box structure. And then on top of that goes some 3/4-inch materials. So there's several built up on top of this. But as far as structure and the way this is built, I mean, you talk about the simplest thing to build. This is absolutely one of the easiest projects to do, one of the most useful projects, because you're going to get all this surface area, and then you could put on the fanciest top you can think of. And in my case, simply put, this is super useful. However, over the years, it's gotten pretty faded just because it's used so much. I'm going to go ahead and, whether or not I rebuild this or keep this the way it is, I'm going to resurface this so that it's a clean, finish on it. But these clamping tracks, I mean, I can't say enough about them. These do get beaten up, and they will take, a little bit of abuse. Obviously, I mean, you can see these are pretty hammered, but they do a really good job for what they are used for. And that is to hold down my clamps to keep those guys from lifting up. Now, when you put these on, you have to really think about how you do it, because I don't know if you can see, there's bolts that go up through. So these aren't just screws. These are actual bolts, nuts and bolts. And every, 5 inches, every 4 inches, there's bolts, washers and bolts. So nuts. And of course, all the way through here, you can see even there. Now there's a rail that goes on top, and that's got the, actually going all the way through that 1.5-inch top rail there. So it's pretty cool. It's super strong. So if you clamp something down, a lot of times you'll notice when you clamp something down, it'll actually lift these up. Well, these don't lift up. So if you were to clamp something down on these really tight, in theory, they'll hold it. But if there's any kind of a space above here, and you'll actually pull these guys right out if you have these just screwed in with these normal wood screws. So these won't hold nearly as well as the bolts. The bolts, I mean, you'll bend the material, of course. You'll break everything before you do anything to move these guys. So extremely strong and durable, but over time, the finish on the aluminum, it fails because there's so much, wear on them. But, you know what? Awesome track system. And of course, the way that I did this was I basically built this right into my table. So if you look at my cast iron wing here, how it just comes in there, and now I can get the clamp guy right in there. Very cool. Now, also you'll notice I've got clamps here. So these clamps have always been here, but I used to have a different rack. I had a homemade rack, which was essentially a piece of wood. And to make it really simple, it was a piece of wood at a 90-degree angle. So I had a piece like this coming down, and then I had one coming out. So I would connect that to the cabinet with screws and glue, I believe. And that worked really well. However, what I did was, in order to mount these or hang them, I would clamp these to that piece of wood. So I would have to open up the jaws and then clamp them. Now, I thought that that would be the way I wanted to do it, because I'm always thinking about earthquakes. And so if you have an earthquake, obviously the things that are going to fall are going to be things like this that are hanging. So for years and years, I did it that way, and it worked great. But I decided to go a different route. And one of the reasons I went with this particular route was because these were super inexpensive, and they held just the right amount of clamps that I needed on each side. So I needed 12 on each side, and it worked perfectly, considering these are 24-inch clamps, and you can see the space I have to hang them. So I like the fact that they just cover the front edge there, and they're ideal for my situation. And of course, this is it. I mean, you can build racks for your clamps. You can have rolling racks, and everybody's got their own thing. It depends on your shop space. But if you're looking for if you're building stuff and this is your main assembly area, my feeling is that why would I want my clamps anywhere else? Because these guys are here, they're completely out of the way, right? I don't bother them. And when I need them, I just grab them. And what's also nice is that they don't slide off. They have that hook there. So you have to physically lift them up. Now, if we did have a bad earthquake, I'm sure some would fall, but it's not so bad. I also have these pads. Now, I've recently purchased some new ones because over time, these things have pretty much degraded. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, because I like to use these for installation, packing of jobs, transporting jobs, I actually take these, although cleaner ones, take them to the job site and use these to protect floors. So as I'm working on the job, I'll have, some sort of a blanket down and then a drop cloth, and I'll put this on top, especially if we're talking about hardwood floors, because, hardwood floors, man, that's a crazy animal. You want to really protect the area that you're working in. So these work really well. You can interlink them together, or you can just use them as a knee pad if you want to have them individual. But I love them. So I just recently bought some new ones, and I'll tell you what, these are pretty expensive, but I found a really good deal on them. And I'll tell you right now, if you're wanting to buy these guys, go to Walmart. Check them out. I think they're $15 for 6 of them. That is a phenomenal deal. And as far as I can tell, they are just as good as these ones. Now, these aren't like the plastic ones, which I don't want. So these are like foam, and actually they're really good to put your knees on. Okay, back to the tables. So when I designed this whole table, I had a couple things to think about. One was maximum space, right? So this is just over, this is about 7 feet for this depth. And this length is, the total length to working length. Now I consider this area as working length as well, because this whole area is my working length. But this area is about 9 and change, a little over 9 feet. And then you add about a foot past there. So that's all usable. And the way that I have it is so that I can actually utilize that whole area. If you look, because my drill press column is to the left and I can go right by it. So I can actually utilize a ton of space right there. Now I didn't always have that boring machine, the line boring machine there. I didn't always have that machine. I got the machine and I figured that was a great spot because that platform I built for that machine, but it also gave me more space. So it really worked well because before it was just an open space that I could theoretically walk behind, but I put so much stuff there that it made a lot of sense to just have a platform that I could slide that on. So when I want to use it, I just pull it over and it works tremendously. Now, so this is over 9 feet, 9.5 feet long by 7 feet. And there's a joint right here. So one piece joins with another piece. And I made that joint in a very good spot, I think, is where that table saw is. So that piece, it just butts right up against that table saw area. So it's a natural stopping point. And then what I figured out was, where do I want, everything else to go? So obviously these had to go here, right? For the miter sled. But as far as the router and all that stuff, since this table was already built for the router right in the middle, I had, this whole area needed to be dealt with. And it's just very, personal preference, but everything seems to work really well. The router set here gives me a fair amount of room here, which is really important to me. I don't like routers that are like right on the edge because this gives me a lot more room. But also, if you want to, there's so many ways you can work with this, the design. And again, because I don't use the fence too often here, the fence isn't my concern. But if I do want to use the fence, it's nice because I can use the one that's on my main router table, or I can use my secondary one that hangs right by my miter saw. So this is my secondary fence, and I'm going to take this over there and I'm going to show you what it is like when I have it on here. So this just goes on with obviously the same bolts that you would pretty much use for, any jig. You just lock them in and get them to slide right in. And once you have them there, all you got to do is lock them down. But this works extremely well. And what's nice about this fence is that it's super flexible. I added these pieces here. I took the single piece off and I actually made my own, and I ripped them into 3 different pieces total for the top. But look what I can do. I have this flexibility here where I can move the fence partitions and actually, however I want to close in that space for whatever I need it to be. If I need it to be real tight or completely closed off, I can do whatever I need to do. I can go into the wood if I want to actually route into the wood for super, super safe operations to make a 0 clearance insert. So I've got plenty of options for this design, and it works extremely well. Now, this particular company, Pinnacle, they don't make this anymore. This was a Woodcraft. I believe this was a Woodcraft brand, but I'm not positive on that. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's what it was, but it's pretty much I don't know if you can get any of the Pinnacle stuff anymore, but you might be able to find stuff online. But this is actually a really cool fence, the way that they have it set up. And it's also individual. So I can take this fence and I can move it a little bit if I'm gonna do more like a shaping operation, right? If I'm taking all the material off the wood, I can move this fence in or out in order to accommodate that. So it's really cool. But I like the dust collection port. Now I've modified this a little bit, so it's got a ramp there. I actually made a video on doing that. And it's pretty cool because if the chips go in there and then they just fly up right to the port. So it's very efficient considering this router table originally did have dust collection in it. I had a 4-inch dust port. You can see that cover right there is literally covering up that dust port. The reason I covered it up was because I used to keep, at some point I changed my mind and I didn't have dust collection going to it because I had the outfeed table and everything was right there. And so it didn't work out and I decided, forget it. I'm not even going to connect dust collection to it because I put my, I used to put my sled there, but my sled actually hangs up there now. So I actually keep my extension table there, but now that's actually going to be hanging too. So that whole space is open now, which is great because I can utilize that for more, more storage. So I can figure out what I'm going to do with that space. Also, if I incorporate a sliding table saw into the shop, which I may be doing, I'm going to have to figure out how to actually do that. So anyways, having some more flexibility is pretty cool. Now, this was one thing that if I could change, I would change, and that is the way that this door intersects the cabinet. Because ultimately, when I first did this cabinet, I didn't need that, right? It wasn't, it was portable. So if I wanted to move the table a little bit to open up the door, I could, but I had to I had to notch that out in order to get the door to swing by. It opened a little bit, but I couldn't open it fully. So I decided to cut out that area so I could open it fully. But here's the problem. In doing that, I gave my strength all away. So this whole area now doesn't have that structural support because I literally cut it out. So that lost some strength. So that's what I was talking about where I had some minor issues to deal with. But you can see here, I've got obviously lots of stuff going on, lots of storage. I keep my lay dovetail jig back there and some grip, rubber grip stuff. My miter gauge. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff I have stored back here. And of course, I've got my big 6-inch pipe going to the table saw. Now, you might wonder, how is it 6 inches? Because these are 4-inch ports. Well, I actually cut that open and made a 6-inch, and I put a big 6-inch blast gate there. So that thing, I mean, it's awesome. I can shut it off if I want to. Never gets shut off, really. It's always on. But it's really cool to have that spiral duct going all the way to the saw. Because once you start putting all that rubber, the plastic ductwork, it doesn't, you lose a lot of CFM. So this is if you want to get max CFM, just run straight the hard metal ductwork. As big as you can get it running through to the saws, you get much more efficient collection. Okay, so this guy here is connected ultimately to this with this piece of wood right here. It actually straddles underneath and it's screwed to the table and it's screwed to the saw. So I've got a connection point right here, and that literally is the only connection to the table. So that one area right there is it. So all this stuff is free. There's nothing connecting itself to the outfeed table. Big assembly table that doubles as, or triples and quadruples as other stuff. So I call it a multi-purpose table. And as you can see, it works extremely well. Definitely very efficient when I'm working. I think it's a really cool design and it works really well for me. My feeling is that if you had one of these, I think that you could have just this and you could have a full shop in your garage or wherever you are, because this all by itself would handle your assembly, your sanding centers, all your operations, hand tools, your routers, your track saws, all this stuff. You could do all here, plus of course with the table saw. And you don't have to have a bunch of other things. You could do a lot of stuff here. And I think this would fit into a lot of garages. Now you can see here, the width of my garage is a 2-car garage. And that area there is a little bit bigger than a normal 2-car garage, but it's a pretty decent amount of space there, but it's not huge to the left of the garage. But it fits, like obviously you can see quite a bit of stuff fits there. But this guy here, as you can see, this is the middle of the garage, the crack here in the floor. And this just barely covers that. And really, this whole thing could be moved to the right easily, totally easily. But the only reason I didn't do that was because I wanted to give myself plenty of space to walk around if I needed to access things like this. But here's the reality. I don't do anything over here except store my plywood. When I'm building stuff, I have stuff staged so that, I've got scraps there. This guy goes right under there. So that guy's out of the way. So it fits perfectly in between everything. But this whole area becomes my staging area for products as I'm building them. And then of course I can put stuff here as I'm working on them as well. And of course there. So this is kind of like the way that I work, the system that I have to keep things organized. But I definitely feel like I could easily move this thing over because I'm not utilizing, this part of the table so much. Obviously with this there, it takes up a tremendous amount of space, but that that could be moved. If you were thinking about having something like this, if you shifted it over a little bit more, I could still get this storage in here, but I would gain more side space over there. But again, I don't feel like I need it. However, I think you could look at all opportunities to gain space as you're working in your shop. So if you have only a 2-car garage, think about it, this style. So lots of people have asked about this particular table, and I really wanted to show an in-depth video on it. And although I'm not building it in the video, I'm trying to show everything about it and how it functions and the size of it. And of course, when you have a saw like this, right? So it's a 52-inch capacity saw. That's what the owner's manual says. I can cross cut like 60 inches, and that's to the column here. It's about 60 inches. So on my crosscut sled. But typically I just spin the pieces around to cut from the other side. So when I originally had set this up, I thought I would be cutting more on the right side. If possible, if I needed to, I would. But reality is that I just spin everything if it's over 60 inches because I don't want to move my guard. I want to keep the dust collection and guard there. So I don't ever want to move that guy. And if I can help it, I don't. It's there all the time. I would rather spin the piece. So now sometimes I'm working with large pieces. Like for instance, this cabinet is 9 feet long. So I've actually been working with 10-foot sheets. Now 10-foot long sheets are different than 8-foot long in the sense that it does take up quite a bit more space to work with. Thankfully, it was just one sheet that I needed. But the thought that when you have a 10-foot long sheet that you're machining, it really does change the whole thing because everything is designed around 8 feet for me. My distance between the saw and the door of the garage happens to be just over that amount. So when I lift up my 8-foot long sheet, I'm really close to here. So I decided to do it that way because I could maximize the rip out outfeed length. So I can rip, I can get a maximum outfeed length of about 12 feet. So 12 feet to the wall, and I can get just over 8 feet, and that's with this. If I need to cut longer, I just open up the door and I do my rip and then shut it. So it works out great because I can always do that, but I can't get more space where the wall is. So I just wanted to make sure I had the most yield there. Okay. And it's been a lot of fun modifying it. And yeah, man, I'm just telling you, I'm just looking at the wood and I'm just thinking this is maple, and this has been, it's really, when you look at it like this, it's like, wow, this is really taking a beating. You know what I mean? I just, you know, it's definitely, it brings back a lot of memories, especially when you draw projects on your countertop. When I draw projects, I look at it years later and I can still see, and I remember jobs, you know, or maybe a stain from something. Maybe you spilled something, and these workbenches, they have that character, and it's just those memories that you have from it. So sometimes I do really big layouts if I'm doing angled cabinets, so I'll actually draw everything on the workbench. And so that's another thing about this I forgot to mention. You can do that kind of stuff with these big surfaces rather than using a floor or something. You can actually do full-scale drawings. Oh, and another thing is I wanted to show you, I don't have an insert plate, and I don't have one on my other one either. So I have two routers that go in here. One is a 7518 Porter cable, and the other is my Milwaukee. So the Milwaukee's in there right now. The Porter cable I originally had in there is not in there anymore. But I don't have, you noticed, an insert plate, and I don't necessarily love insert plates just because of the way that they can potentially lift up. You can snag things on them. I would rather it be this type of thing where it's just, you know, coming through, especially if I'm just using, you know, max, you know, 2-inch diameter bits. This hole is perfectly sized for that. So I know that originally I had used plates back in the day, but this is super easy. And this, you know, is just one of those things where it's just not difficult to do. And you don't have to worry about snagging on plates, you know, them being perfectly flush and all that stuff. You don't have to worry about it. My normal everyday router, of course, is this one. So that has an insert from one of my plates, and I can remove this if I want to, but this guy right here, just, I mean, it's super simple, and I don't have to worry about snagging on a plate there, and it works really well. You'd be surprised. Low tech sometimes is the best tech. And please let me know if you have any questions. And again, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and like the videos. Let me know if there's anything you'd like to see. Thanks again. Bye-bye.